So hello everyone, my name is Andy. I'm from a company called Side Labs, and we really focus on social impact without code. So it's really, we're trying to create digital products, and previously I was at a big digital agency where we had a whole batch of designers and front-end devs and back-end devs and QAs, and I'm just loving this no-code world because all of that process and a huge amount of conversation and meetings that it requires to build products in that code-based world is now basically one person can do all those jobs and makes things happen so much more quickly. So this is going to be a whistle-stop tour. Apologies if it's all a bit quick. So what is no-code? No-code refers to a collection of apps which allow you to develop digital services without having to write code. No-code may lack some of the flexibility compared to writing code, but it requires less knowledge. It's the IKEA flat pack way of building digital tools: simple, functional, easy, and often good enough. For me, that IKEA flat pack is a kind of hits the nail on the head as an analogy. If you wanted to create the best wardrobe in the world, you'd probably hire someone a carpenter or a joiner to build it from scratch. But 90% of the time, an IKEA wardrobe does the job. Maybe it doesn't fit quite as perfectly as one you built yourself, but you can put it together yourself, and in a tenth of the time and for a tenth of the money of making a bespoke one, you can get it done. That might sound a bit abstract. Some of the tools that are kind of, I guess, best known in the world of no code are Airtable, which many of you will have come across. It's like halfway between a database and a spreadsheet and has kind of magic coding powers. Zapier, which is a bit like a glue that links together all the different other no-code tools and is super useful. One that we love particularly at Side is Webflow, which is a way of building websites. It builds them, launches them, and manages them all quite literally, I reckon, at about 4 times the speed of our previous way of building websites. It's so quick and so powerful. But there's quite a fuzzy edge to what no code is. So I think something like SurveyMonkey really is a no code tool, even though it predates the term no code, because it allows anyone to create a survey, whereas 15 years ago, if you were thinking about creating a survey, even that might have been a job where you'd need to talk to a designer and then a developer and have several months of iteration. Now you can do it in 10 minutes, pretty much as quickly as you think about it. So the next bit of my talk is going to be on examples of no code. We've got, so my colleague at Side put together this little website called Tools for Good. So we've just tried to find things that are possible with no code reusable tools. I'll share all these links at the end. So if you're trying to create something like an online directory of information, there's a whole load of tools that do this. Coda's one, Webflow's another, Glide's another one. If you're trying to do some sort of online learning, then online community, then Discourse, or even Slack, but there's lots of different ways to cut it. So you can also approach it from a kind of meetup or Eventbrite type of angle. If you're trying to create a directory or a list of resources, which again is a very common pattern in the world of charities, then Glide is one tool we like. Sometimes I'm asked, should you use no code for everything? I think if we go back to the IKEA analogy, if you're doing something that's been done lots of times before, then there's probably a pretty good no code solution for it. So if you're creating information into a learning experience, if you're creating a directory of services, if you're trying to schedule a whole batch of people to turn up at a service that used to be online, all of those things are problems that people have solved dozens and dozens of times. And once something's been solved dozens and dozens of times, someone will turn it into a no-code tool, or in fact, dozens of people normally will have turned it into dozens of no-code tools. So part of the challenge ends up being to kind of map the right tool for the right job. That does mean to kind of look at it from the other point of view, when wouldn't you use a no-code tool? I think that's if you're trying to do something that you think no one has really ever done anything like this before. So if you're Google optimizing a search engine that's used concurrently by billions of people, or if you're DeepMind with doing doing protein folding, then that's probably not a case for no code. But if you kind of think, well, I can imagine there's a half a dozen other charities in the UK doing something vaguely similar in a different subject area. I'd start by looking at Nocode. This website itself, this directory is built in Webflow and then using a few add-ons. So this favoriting functionality is from an add-on to Webflow called JetBoost, and this is like this was a half-day site to build, so it's just showing how quick it can be. One kind of, Maryan, I think, will go through a deeper example, but here's something that we created earlier for Refugee Action. Refugee Action found through COVID, there was a lot of reports of people bouncing from service to service, didn't know which services were open, which services were shut. How could we create a very quick directory, mobile friendly, that would allow people initially in Manchester and Merseyside to be able to find the services? This is about 3 days work. This is a lovely tool called Glide that allows you to create online, particularly online directories with a very good mobile interface. And this has got built-in maps, so you can zoom in and see any one place, or you can browse by various types of service. And then this goes on to, all of this is updated via a Google spreadsheet. So we've got like five different people at 5 different organizations are given permission, and they can update information. It's nice to see someone updated it yesterday. Just super quick. So that was a service called Glide. And here's the kind of IKEA flat pack configuration part of things. So you log into Glide and you can change the source of where the data is coming from. You can do various things about log on, privacy, sharing, different things about data, all of which is kind of 2 clicks away. As I say, with Nocode, you're kind of forced down a path that the tool creator has created for you. So you haven't got the freedom that you've got with code, but if you find the tool where the creator of the tool's vision fits with your vision of what needs to be done, or at least is close enough, then you can really get a lot done pretty quickly. I was kind of pretty amazed when we sort of got into Nocode a couple of years ago, just how quickly we were getting stuff done. So I took a bit of time to talk to other people in the world and find some charities who were using Nocode. And here's a little article I wrote last year. Three different people, all with similar levels of enthusiasm. So there's Sonia at Westminster Foundation for Democracy, Joey at a charity called Carefree, and Sarah at Oxford Hub. They were all doing different jobs, so doing different tasks. So one is this one here, Sarah, is a bit like a kind of volunteer management system. Sonia is more like a reporting and database system. And Joey's system is actually kind of quite a bit more complicated. It's kind of complex matching of carers and free hotel rooms. Interesting things to note and interesting commonalities. None of these 3 people are software developers. They're all people who are kind of, they all strike me as bright, kind of interested in having, up for getting their hands dirty and having a go. I think 2 of the 3 had come from a world where they inherited some legacy piece of software where they'd, someone previously had spent 20 or 40 grand on the solution and everyone hated it. And then they started from scratch, finding the right bit of software, and often sort of 30, 50 quid a month, which most no code is around that sort of price, and just kept tinkering and tweaking, and over the course of a year creating something that really seemed to generate good energy within the organization. So I think that's me. I've put these links on a document here, which I'll be able to share in the chat in a minute. So if you want to look a bit further, then those are all those links. And I'm very enthusiastic about this area. I think there's such potential for charities to really magnify their impact and turn technology into a superpower rather than something that so often is a kind of problem area. So I'd love to chat about it either afterwards, or feel free to email me, Andy at Side Labs.
Yeah, brilliant, Andy. That was so helpful. Thank you. And what a sort of comprehensive whistle top tour in such a short space of time. Loads of useful links there. And I think we've got Joey's is with us somewhere in the group. So it'd be great to hear your kind of thoughts and share some of your experience in a bit. And Sarah from Oxford Hub, we've got lots of resources on the back of some of that work and project on the Catalyst website, so that I will also add some links in the chat or the Google Doc to that. Thanks so much, Andy. We'll come back to questions and thoughts and reflections in a bit. It'd be great to actually bring up another sort of Catalyst project, Maryan, you were involved in with Karas, and some of the work you did and kind of help them streamline some of their kind of tools and services. So over to you, Maryan. Thanks for joining us, by the way.
Yeah, no problem. I'll take it from here. Let me just share my screen quickly. So I'm Maryan, I'm a UX designer. I currently work at Cyberduck, but I used to work at Side Labs, which is where this project came up. I actually worked with Andy on this one. So if you have any input, feel free. Can anyone see this screen on the presentation?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so basically what we did for Karas was automate their manual data entry processes. So I'll talk a little bit about what the issue was and how it came about and why we decided to use Integromat as a solution and how they're faring right now using it on their own. And they haven't contacted with me for help. So that's a really good sign on that one. So yeah, let me just click. So basically the project was with Karas. And Karas, what they do is offer a range of activities for people from a refugee background. So they give ESOL classes, art classes, and a million other classes as well. So that's the main thing they do. But the problem that they were having was that organizing these events just required a lot of data entry. And we wanted to find out a way to kind of take that off their plate. So if I take a step back and tell you how the whole process works. So when they first get a new client coming in, someone that needs help that's been referred to them, they use a Google form to do the intake process, asking them questions, their name, address, all that stuff, and also what kind of activities they want to take part in, and loads more information. They then take that information and they put it into something called Lamplight, which is their database. So it's a case of copy pasting the information from the Google form into that. Once they've done that, they send a text reminder to everyone a day before the event of the activity they chose to take part in, and then again on the same day. So basically what we did was just talk them through the entire process and what issues they faced. And we basically noticed that a lot of it was just them entering information over and over again. And since the majority of the things they do is activity-based, you can imagine how much that would accumulate to. So the problems we found was, first of all, the texts. So they were sending about 1,000 text messages every month. And because of the issues with sending bulk messages, mass messaging, is being seen as spam. So they can't just get a whole group of people and send them one text. And then that kind of leaves them in a position where they had to write each individual text to each individual person attending the event and their carer as well. And they wanted to personalize it. So they would copy paste, add the name and send it. And that time just really added up. I think they said around an hour per activity of just messaging nonstop. And then they get responses and they have a whole list that they have to make sure they kind of send that invite to everyone. And then on top of that, they send it again on the day of the event. So that added up. And the second issue was that whole copy pasting process from a Google form into Lamplight. So they had about 64 intakes every month, and copy pasting that information took around 15 to 20 minutes, which is not a fun amount of time. The reason they chose to use a Google form instead of just going straight to their database when they intake a new person is because of how it's laid out. If you can see, it might be a bit small. It has loads of tabs and each tab has a section for the information they're collecting. And it's not exactly intuitive. So you wouldn't know where to put that information. Even if you used it a million times, you'd be going into the wrong tabs. And it just wasn't the right flow for that type of conversation. So that meant they were kind of forced to stick to a Google form that followed their flow. So yeah, and then they had to do that 15 minutes of copy pasting. The biggest issue around this was who was doing the copy pasting and the messaging. And that was senior members of staff who have a world of experience. And the reason for this is confidentiality. So there's a lot of contact details that they didn't really want a volunteer to handle. And also they would have to create a profile in Lamplight if they wanted someone to take that over, which they also wouldn't want to do. And you don't want to be paying someone just to do data entry all day long. So that meant they were doing it for well over 20 hours is what we kind of calculated. It could be more or less, but that's still an insane amount of time for a senior member to be copy pasting stuff and sending texts. And they were probably very exhausted doing that. So what we decided was, if you can't get a person to do it, maybe we can automate it. And on top of that, we wanted to make sure that they could handle this automation on their own and they wouldn't need us to be there to support them. And we didn't want a whole load of coding to go on either, because everyone knows once you've done it, how do you handle that if you have no experience? So yeah, so the first thing we did was not Integromat related quite yet. It's something called Text Magic. We thought this would be the best fit for solving the issue of sending bulk messages and being able to personalize it. What Text Magic does is you can create a whole list. For example, if there's a yoga class that you want to send a specific text to on a certain time of day, and like here it says daily, monthly, whatever, you can write the message and then you can populate the first name of the people in that list. So you send it one by one and you only have to set it up once and it's there forever. So there's no more texting anymore going on there. The only thing they do now is add a new person that they've done an intake for, which is kind of where Integromat does come in, and I'll show you in a second. So yeah, so that solved that issue. If you want to know more about that, just ask me. But the second bit where we did use Integromat extensively is this bit, where we wanted to kind of pull the data from each field into the right section, so they wouldn't have to do that anymore. So basically, if I just go straight to Integromat, the summary of it. So what we wanted to do was take the information from the Google form, certain bits, and use Integromat to just take that field and push it into the different tools that they were using. So I wanted most of the form fields to go into Lamplight and the different sections. And then I wanted to take the name and phone number to go into Text Magic so that person would get a text reminder. And the last thing I wanted to do was use Integromat to take the name and phone number of that person and put it into their contact list so that when they got a response, they would know who that is and they could continue messaging with them. So yeah, if I just jump straight into Integromat now and I'll show you. So this is what it looks like. It's basically just taking information from one platform and populating it into the other as though you were copy pasting stuff and just taking yourself out of that equation. So it has loads of options. So this is like an extensive list of all the different tools that you can connect together. It can be from just automating some kind of manual process, or I don't know, sending someone an email based on a trigger on a different software. But I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. I won't be able to show you the exact flow we made for Karas, but I made a little pretend little flow. So yeah, so what I want to do today to show you how this works is I want to take the information from this document. So I've created a made up scenario where somebody kind of reports their issue, and I want a card to appear in Trello, a project management platform. So I want a card to appear here that says an issue has happened and somebody wants to, work on it. So I want to create a card like that based on the information that comes through here, so you wouldn't have to manually make that card. So to do this, if I can just get rid of the controls for Zoom, that'd be good, but hang on one sec. There we go. So on Integromat, what I did was create a scenario. So scenarios are basically the automations, and they're all kept in this one big list, and this is the one I made for today. So I connected a Google form to the Trello card. So basically what I did was say that I wanted the information from this Google form, which is stored in an Excel sheet. So if that's confusing, that's okay. And it goes here. So like if someone says, what's your name? They put the information goes here and so on and so forth. And I want to connect that to my Trello. Yeah. So in the card, I want the issue to appear in this section, and I want the description to show their name and their contact details. So I'm saying pull that information and put it there. So what I do in Integromat is I pull up Google Forms. It's very simple. I actually made this in a few minutes. After all, once you get used to how everything looks, you can do it pretty quickly. So if I click on this module here, it's going to open up, and all I do is connect it to my Gmail account. So I said in my Gmail, I want you to pull the information from this Excel sheet, which is connected to that Google form, and I want you to go to that tab. So this tab here. That's it. That's all I did for the Google form part. And then I said on Trello, the part for Trello, if I go into that, I just basically outlined how and where I wanted that information. So I connected my Trello, which is just a case of logging in after I click add. And then it has access. And then it asked me, which list do you want? I was like, I want to select it for myself. Which board do you want? Which is essentially this entire thing, this board. There's loads of boards on Trello. And then what I did was say that test board, and I want information from the open list. So I want whatever I create to go into this list here, not in progress or completed. And then on top of that, I added an extra layer where I want it to be tagged as urgent. If someone in this Google form says, it's an urgent situation, I want you to handle it, I want it to be ticked as urgent in Trello as well. So I ticked that. And then below here, I said who I want to handle that situation. And this is the interesting bit. So this is the data part. If I can show you both things. Yeah, you'll see how if I hover over this, it's showing that it's pulsating the Google form. So that means it's pulling information from that module there that I connected to. So the name is that top part of the card. So the issue, what issue are you having? Any information that's come in, I want it to go to that part. And then description is this part of the card. If I go in again, this bit here, I want this information to go in there. I want the name to be what's your name, whatever they put in, and contact details to be their email. And that's it. That's all I asked for it to do. So if I press OK, one extra thing I did was kind of do a filter. So I wouldn't want everyone who completed that form to go into urgent. So I put a filter saying only the people who ticked urgent need to go into this one. And if I were to build it out further, I would create 2 more filters for not urgent and kind of urgent. So if I run it now, it will hopefully work. So because it's not kind of automated yet, so I'm going to do it manually. And then it pulls the information. So that's that info on the Google form. I select it. And then fingers crossed, I run it. Okay, so it's saying that it went well. So if I go into Trello, there should be a card now. There it is. So there's a card and it's marked as red. And that's it. That's the entire automation. So I don't have to make a card. Somebody fills out that form. I'll get notified in Trello that something happened. And then I can just work on it and say it's in progress. Or I can see who has to handle it, which is me. And yeah, that's it. So if I show you a bit more about what you can do. So it's usually the case with Integromat is like, what do I create? What do I need it for? And there's a million different things you can do. They even have kind of sections on their website that lets you figure out, maybe you want a project management thing like I did, and it gives you all the different types of stuff you can do. You can connect together. Yeah, that's it. So if I go back to the presentation, this is where I created for Keras. So I couldn't go in, but it looks more complicated only because Lamplight doesn't support, Integromat doesn't support Lamplight right now. So I had to actually go in there and manually make this, but in majority of the occasions, you can find your tool. If it's been made in the last 5 years, you'll see it on Integromat and you can make your own connections. And yeah, it's not as complicated as you think. That's the key thing. So pricing, you can do this for free, essentially. If you do a small automation and not much happens, you maybe have like, let's say 1,000 Trello cards coming in that month, you wouldn't need to go into the paid plan. But if you want to do more extensive things like Keras did, it will cost you a bit more. I think it's about £9, but you can check on the website. But for simple things, just to try it out, you could do it for free. There's also another option called Zapier, which is slightly simpler, but I would still recommend Integromat because visually it's nicer to use, because Zapier has this form-like situation where you fill things out. And for text magic, just to know, it's about 4p per text. But if you think about the massive amount of saving in time and money, that's not so bad. Yeah, so the impact this had on Keras. So we're guessing around 23 hours. We just only recently implemented this, but you can see how huge of a difference this would make in their workflow. So they don't have to do any copy pasting. And since I showed them how to use it, they've already started thinking about other things they can automate, like all this other data entry stuff. And you can see how the hours will accumulate over time. And now they can just take that time and put it towards actually doing their jobs and what they're really good at, providing new activities, looking at statistics and all that stuff. So yeah, it's had a huge positive impact on them, and they don't need any help with it, because once you learn it, you kind of got it and you can make whatever connections you want. yeah, so any questions? Or I'll throw it back to you. Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Maryan. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Wow. And thanks for the live demo. And it turned out into a live tutorial. So that's so helpful. Thank you to see it in action. And I know how challenging part of that project was. So it's really nice to see the impact it's had and how you've helped them, the Karas team, to bring it in-house and feel confident in using it for different purposes. So really brilliant. There's a lot of love for Integromat in the chat. And by the way, they were excited that we were talking about their product in this meetup. So they've offered the pay package. You've got the free, the basic standard, which is $29 a month. They've offered a free standard package for a month, so you can try it out. You get up to 40,000 operations. So if if you need that much, there's a promo code in the Google Doc. So feel free to use that free for a month, courtesy of the Integromat sales team. Brilliant. I think we've got some questions too coming through the chat and the GDoc. I know, Debbie, you've been busy kind of ordering them and all that, because we're not using Slido today. So anything that's come through that hasn't already been responded to in the chat, I wonder.
Thanks, David. I think we did. There's a collective job to put the questions that came through in the chat on the GDoc, and Andy currently was already answering some questions, but there's a few questions that are still there. So if I can throw that in the group, and Maryan and Andy, feel free to answer if you know, otherwise we can see if anybody else knows the answer to this. But one of the first questions about limitations of no-code approaches, and if you've had any challenges with clients to explain limitations. Andy, I don't know if you want to comment on that, because you touched on, the benefits and the restrictions with no code. So have you had any conversation with clients where you had to kind of go more into that?
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing it for 2 years, and I don't think we've had many. I can't really think of anyone who's kind of insisted on a code approach, or I mean, I think the kind of, I mean, I guess a lot of the time it sort of comes back, I mean, having come from a kind of more code-based agency, where I was kind of aware that often jobs would be getting priced out of jobs, because you'd be saying, well, we think to do this properly would be X, and they'd be like, oh, we've only got Y. Now I sort of find quite often we're right at the most cost competitive end, because we're thinking, well, this looks like a job that's like, like a 10 grand job, and people are bidding like sort of 20 to 50 grand. And so and we were a very kind of sort of top end code agency when we did that. So we were kind of often thinking, well, people are saying they'll do this for 40 grand, but really we reckon it's a 80 grand job. Anyway, so from an agency point of view, it's been a joy that you're sort of able to transfer those costs benefits along to the agency, and I think most along to charity, and I think charities in general want to achieve an outcome rather than are particularly worried about the details of how it's done underneath. And then also there's some great resources online about how how no code is. I think the maintenance is almost always a lot easier. Often the no-code tools are kind of improving over time rather than getting more buggy, whereas something you build sort of slightly rusts over time. You almost get the opposite effect with no-code. You can show them how they'll be able to take ownership of it. And I think things like security, and you've got, when I was talking to Jerry about it, he once described it as having you've got a legion of great developers working on your problem, and that's exactly the case. Once you've moved into a certain no-code scenario, there will be a team there back at whatever the organization is, just trying to make that product better and better. And occasionally they'll launch a new feature. You're like, wow, this is for free. This has suddenly improved our solution.
Yeah, we find that's a good selling point. It's always being developed, and you're not paying for it, and it's shared by everybody. Great, thank you, Andy. I'm just going to go to some questions have been answered, so I'm skipping them for the time. So do come back to the doc to read back on that. Any recommendations, either one of you, for books or reading on no code? Andy, you shared a link to makerspad.co, which has a lot of learning. And is there anything else either one of you recommend for people who want to find out more or want to upskill themselves?
I mean, the other thing I'd recommend is just jumping into, so many things. If you kind of imagine a sample project and then jump in, that it's like IKEA flat furniture. It's kind of good to get started. But
Yeah, there's loads of YouTube tutorials as well. That's what I found super helpful. And the tools themselves offer support that you can just tap into relatively easily. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, a lot of the tools have tutorials. Question about if Integromat is more ethical than Zapier. I don't know if either one of you knows that.
Not sure, but I did check if they were GDPR compliant, and it's a yes on that. I didn't dive deeply into it, but you can do that.
yeah, I mean, whenever I've looked into it for a client with different tools, I've always had a pretty good story on GDPR. And I kind of, from a kind of 30,000 foot view, I'm thinking it's their business model is to be able to make this work. Whereas if you're building something from scratch, it just becomes your problem to ensure that it's compliant. So I think generally that they're pretty strong on that. In reply to the question of these startups not sustaining themselves versus the big tech companies, yeah, I think that's definitely one thing that you need to be alert to. And it's such a sort of strongly growing and emerging sector at the moment that, and every day you see like a tool, or like every month you see a tool you're using getting like 150 million pounds worth of funding. You're like, wow, that's that's all money that's going to go into making this tool even better. And I think, but so I think things like the Survey Monkeys, the Zapiers, the Airtables, you can be pretty sure it'll be around. Then there's a kind of a medium tail of kind of hundreds of other tools that are also pretty well funded and will be around for a good amount of time. And if you're doing something a bit off the beaten track, I think you need to think a bit harder and look into that. But I think generally you kind of get a feel that some things have a bit of momentum behind them, and other things are gathering dust. What I would say, I've kind of noticed that not so much the no-code tools, but there's kind of certain tools that are kind of from the kind of previous era of software, which are more, I think one of the things that differentiates no-code is it tends to be self-service, 50 quid a month, whereas the previous generation, normally you'd talk to a salesman, often it would be tens of thousands or thousands of pounds to buy. I've had more problem with those sort of systems, just seeming like whatever team has run out of oomph and development potential, and you're kind of, you're stuck with integrating with something that's 5-10 years off the pace.
Yeah. Just checking. Thank you. Just checking on the first of all of time, David. I think we've got 9 minutes left.
Yeah, I think it's a great discussion, and thanks for taking the time to answer these questions.
Yeah.
And thanks for all your questions. I think we can pick a couple more up in the GDoc, and then it'd be great if Andy, Maryan, and anyone else really who might have expertise in this could quickly answer them in the GDoc, so we can sort of capture that for as part of the follow-up. I mean, just interesting. Just want to make sure everyone gets the chance to share. And I know, Joey, you mentioned you were using no-code tools like Carefree. You've got lots of you've got experiences in using no-code tools, some good, maybe some bad. It'd be great to spend a couple of minutes kind of just getting you the chance to share some of those with the group. Don't know if anyone wants to share anything based on what you just heard or your own experience. Joey?
Yeah, happy to. Like Andy and I met, I think, last year, and that was very early on when I joined Carefree. And the biggest challenge that Carefree was having, although we wanted to be tech first, we had all these big grand ideas, our tech was failing, and we just didn't have the funding to build, let alone maintain the tech that we were building from scratch. And that's kind of why they brought me in, because I had experience, even though I didn't even know that there was a label for it, but I had experience in building no code on businesses built in a no code environment. So I was hoping that we could kind of replicate that for Carefree, and that's exactly what we've done. So our whole tech architecture was almost 90% custom built by 2 developers in Argentina that it was really painful, and in the end, nothing kind of worked. And although our vision and the model that we work towards is great, the tech was just not working. And now in the last year, we've built 4 different members areas. We have user authentication. We built a self-referral pathway where users can upload their passwords, all GDPR compliant in a very safe kind of environment. We're launching our new booking hub. That's the only custom piece in the whole architecture, which is a booking hub where verified carers have access to browse and book a break. You know, so we've moved from 90% custom to, I think, 85% no code. And the stuff that we're working with now and that we've kind of gradually releasing to our stakeholders, we could have never built if everything was custom and built from scratch. I think in total we work with about 30 to 35 no-code tools, varying from, we use Zapier, Integromat, Typeform. But then, like Andy said, what makes a no-code tool a no-code tool? I also see like Pipedrive or CRM a no-code tool because it integrates so well with other solutions. So yeah, it's really exciting what we're doing, and I mean the proof will be in the pudding when we go live within the next couple of weeks and invite the 2,000 verified carers onto our platform in real time to book breaks. But
Brilliant.
yeah, it's really useful. But yeah, we build everything with no code, so if we can help it, and we want to share our learnings with other charities and other organizations within the social sector. I actually had a really great interview that was published a couple of days ago with Typeform, which I can share the link. And it's like Maryan's great showcase. That it's a similar thing that they've interviewed me with, and it's similar where we submit a Typeform, it goes into Zapier in this case, and then the Zapier does this whole bunch of things, which allows us to not have to do it manually anymore. And that's just like a tiny element of our platform. So I'll share that link as well, as it could be useful.
Thanks very much, Joey. Thanks a lot for sharing that. Really exciting work. Does anyone else would like to share any thoughts or reflections on using no code, or interested in using no code, hating no code? No.
I was just curious, like
Danny,
we talked about no code, but that I wondered where the idea of using like off-the-shelf free trials fits in with the philosophy of being able to prototype or like use things. So it's like a charity could use a trial of a chatbot so that they could understand what it's like to actually use, operationally what the impacts are, as a means of de-risking. So it's sort of similar to no code, but off-the-shelf trials.
thanks, Andy. Danny, sorry. Thanks, Danny. Any very quick thoughts and any sort of more detailed thoughts into the GDoc would be welcome from the group on Danny's question regarding off-the-shelf tools.
I'd say, yeah, free trials are all, it's all kind of part of the world of software moving towards being more user-friendly, being a lot cheaper, not having to go through loads of meetings and pay tens of thousands of pounds up front.
Yeah, and I don't see why not. It's super easy to just jump in and do a very small part of your process on a free bit. And then once you kind of build off from there and you actually need it and depend on it, you can start paying. It just makes sense.
Yeah, it really allows you to be really agile. Try something out. Does it work? Great. If it doesn't work, not a problem. We try something else. We move forward. And just a point on the cost. The majority, I would say, more than 80% of the no-code tools that we work with provide us with a charity discount. You just have to ask kindly, and most startups, can find it useful. So we literally, the majority of the tools that we work with give us quite a generous discount. Just so never worth.
The great joy of using free trials as well is it moves you from a world where you're spending loads of time writing documentation of this is how this system might work. And always that documentation, once you start developing it, it's such a rough approximation for reality. Whereas once you're playing with a free trial and you're able to go into the next meeting with the agency, with the charity, and say, hey, how does this feel to you? You're just actually, you're mapping so much closer to the reality that you're having far more useful conversations rather than a sort of 3-page spec, which everyone's kind of got a slightly different picture from, and the reality will be yet again different from anyone's picture. And so you can have those meetings where you're discussing something that's just prior to Nocode that is so far from the reality of what gets delivered. And so it just leads to much more fruitful discussions because you're banging on something that's really close to reality.
Brilliant, thanks. I'm going to stop the discussion there. Sorry, it sounds like we need a part 2, part 3, as David suggests in the chat. And James, we did see your questions. We'll make sure that they're picked up in the Google Doc.